Okay, so here we are. We find ourselves in the month of Tammuz, and we're a week into Tammuz, but Tammuz actually is a month in which the energy stays pretty consistent throughout. You know, sometimes we talk about how the energy of the month sort of shifts towards the middle of the month. Sometimes it eases up towards the middle of the month. This month is pretty much consistently a challenging month from beginning to end. So even though we're a week into the month, it's still a very good time to talk about the energy, and we have lots of time to work with it. Last month in the spring, we were speaking about the idea that every season, a grouping of 3 months, has a particular energy, is one of the elements of the universe, and each of those 3 months, they work together as a process. The springtime, which is Nisan, Iyar, and Sivan, the 3 months that precede this month, are months in which the light that flows into the universe is very direct. It's pleasant, just the same way that the sunlight is experienced in those months as a very direct and easy flow. That's the way we receive divine energy in those months. The name of Hashem, the Yud, the Hey, the Vav, and the Hey, which are the letters of creation, and the way the divine light comes into the universe, is reflected into the universe, is in a very orderly way, beginning with Nisan, when they are exactly in order, the only month that it's perfect flow of divine energy. The 3 months of the summer are also light months. They're also months in which we experience light very intensely and direct, or yashar, direct light, as opposed to the winter and fall in which we're dealing with a or choser, refracted light, where we start bringing the light back up. So we're still receiving light very direct. In these months, however, the sun is very strong. The energy that we receive is very direct and very strong. We know that when we receive light in a very strong way, it can appear to be darkness. Reb Tzadok HaKohen says that what appears as the deepest darkness is in fact the highest light. So, you know, if we're looking directly into the blinding sun, we become blinded. We see it as the absence of light, as black. So when we experience light in a very intense and direct way, it can appear to us to be darkness. So these months of summer are harsher months. They're months in which the light is very intense, sometimes appearing as darkness. And each of the 3 months of summer are sort of the exact reflection of its sister month in the spring. So the first month of summer, Tammuz, our month now, is a sister month with Nisan, the first month of spring. And as such, it is a more challenging month, but we're working on sort of the shadow side of Nisan. So the energy of Nisan was a very direct energy of receiving. We spoke about the idea that we just get ourselves out of the way, we open ourselves we just allow ourselves to be humble and open to receive the gifts that are given to us, and it's a very sort of passive month of receiving. And the shadow side of that, of receiving, would be taking, right? Where you start receiving to the point that you start taking. And to take that to the next level, taking something that's not even ours. Desiring something that's not ours and taking it. And that really is the idea of jealousy. Desire, jealousy, these are the elements that we have to work through in this month. Tammuz, the word Tammuz, is a compilation of the words tam, the completion, of vav and zayin. Tam, vav, zayin spells Tammuz. The months of Iyar and Sivan are the letters vav and zayin. We spoke about the month of Iyar being the connector month, it's the vav. The month of Sivan being the month of balance, which is the zayin. Tammuz is where we sort of come to the completion of the vav and zayin. So we're working on rounding out the process that we began in the spring, but we have to deal with the klipa side of it in the summer. In these summer months, we're dealing with the other side of it. In order to really come to a place of wholeness, we have to deal with all sides of the issue. We can't just be in this place of the light. We have to understand the other side of it as well and work through the more difficult side of it. So Tammuz is sort of a coming into the wholeness, dealing with the stuff that maybe we didn't deal with in the spring. It's also interesting that a Vav and a Zayin, when you put them together, I don't have a pen on me, but if you put a Vav and a Zayin together, you can picture it, it creates a Chet. And Chet is, thank you, Chet is the letter of this month. So if you put a Vav and a Zayin together, you get the letter Chet, right? So that's the letter, the 2 months of the spring that preceded this are part of the completion of the process that we're in right now. We'll talk a little bit more soon about the letter Chet and how that applies, how that works with this month. So we're sort of working the other side. This month, the name of Hashem is exactly in reverse. So it's the inverse. So whereas in Nisan it was the Yud, the Hey, the Vav, and the Hey, this month it's the Hey, the Vav, the Hey, and the Yud. So it's exactly reversed. So it's a tricky energy to work with. It's a challenging month. This is the month in which we begin mourning the destruction of the temple. And the 17th day of this month is the fast, Shiva Asar B'Tammuz, when the siege on Jerusalem began, and the process of destruction for both the temples began on this day. And we mourn the loss of that in this month. We also know that in this month of Tammuz, actually on the 17th day of Tammuz as well, was the shattering of the first set of luchot. So again, Moses came down and saw this tremendous chet that was happening with the worshiping of the calf and shattered the first luchot. So there's an initial shattering that occurred there as well, a sort of a grief, a loss. And this is also the month in which the Meraglim, the scouts, the spies, went into the land of Israel to see the land of Israel. And that connects very much to the sense of this month, which the Ari tells us it's the sense of vision. So this month we work on our sense of sight, of vision. The body part that's connected to this month, according to the Sefer Yetzirah, are the eyes. We know that we only desire what we see, and we're only jealous of what we desire, right? So everything begins with the eyes. Everything begins with how we observe the world, and that leads us to desire, that leads us to jealousy. We need to begin with the rectification, with the purification of our vision. And that's how we begin. When we see the world differently, we experience the world differently, everything shifts. So this month, we are working on our vision, very much on how we perceive the world. Eini yarda mayim, we say in Echa, where we mourn the destruction of the temple, we say our eyes are pouring water, are pouring tears. And in juxtaposition to that, when we speak about the time of the rebuilding of the temple, we say, Su'u saviv einecha, lift your eyes and look around and you see the redemption. These are the same eyes that are crying the bitter tears, are the eyes that are going to observe the redemption in its fullness. The Bnei Yissaschar writes about tears and crying, that when we're in the midst of crying, those tears are blinding. They blur our vision. They prevent us from seeing straight. They prevent us from seeing anything past ourselves and past our own grief. And you know, when we're in a very bad place, God forbid, we're not in a place of giving, of sharing, of seeing another person's pain. We're really completely wrapped up in our own grief. We can't see past it. This is how the tears blur our vision and prevent us from seeing straight. But then Bnei Yissaschar writes, what happens when we finish crying? When you finish a good cry, what happens? Your eyes are brighter than before. It's cleansed. There's a certain clarity of vision that occurs after the tears. And really when we can see that, even in the process of tears, that these tears are leading to cleansing of our vision. They are going to clarify our vision. They're going to allow us to see the redemption that was sown in the times of our tears. Hazarim b'dima berina yiktsaru. Those who sow in tears will reap in joy. That when we see that within the times, the darkest times of destruction is really the seeds of the redemption. That's when the seeds of the redemption are sown. So even in the midst of our tears, we understand that this is part of our cleansing of our vision, allowing us to see past the darkness. Vayar Elokim et ha'or ki tov, right? The first time we see the word sight or hear of the word sight in the Torah is connected with light. Hashem saw the light and it was good. For sight is connected with or, with light, and with goodness. And truly, when we see with a good eye and when we see positively, seeing is the ultimate good, to see the goodness of creation. The first time we see the letter Chet in the Torah is connected with Choshech, with darkness. This month is the letter Chet. The first time Chet appears in the Torah, and we know every time a first letter appears in the Torah, that's sort of the prototype that letter represents. So Ches represents Choshech, darkness, and which is sort of the opposite. It's the opposite of sight. It's the opposite of vision. It's the absence of light. It's the absence of vision. So both these elements are very present in this month. The idea of vision and light, and the shadow side, darkness, which is such a deep, blinding light that it appears to us as the absence of light, as darkness. And our work really is to work through that darkness and to find the light this month. The spies, the scouts that went out this month to scout the land were seeing the land, right? They went to see the land, but what reports did they come back with? Negative. They came back saying, we saw the land and we appeared in the eyes of the people as ants, right? They're so large that in their eyes we look like ants. How did they know what they look like in their eyes? So they're projecting. They were projecting something. They weren't seeing things as they were. They were seeing things as they actually are. They were seeing things as they were. And in truth, this is really how we see in life. We never actually see things objectively. There's no such thing. Because the process of vision, the process of seeing something, is really a process of the brain projecting the image outward. There's light that comes in, our brain processes it, and then we project it as an image. Nothing is absolute then. Nothing is really as it is. It's as we see it. So vision is really not a passive act. It's an active projection that comes from our mind. So we don't see things the way they are. We see things the way we are. And that's a very important thing to understand. We live in a very visual time. We're bombarded with visual imagery at every moment now. I mean, more than ever before in the history. I think there was like some study where maybe in the 70s, we were seeing something like 500 ads per day. And then this study, which was done maybe 2010 or a little later than that, they said that we're seeing about 5,000 ads a day. We are bombarded, we are assaulted with and if this was in 2010, I want you to just multiply that. I mean, just think about every web page that we go on with the Google ads and what's being put into our consciousness. We are constantly being assaulted by imagery. So how do we control what it is that we see? If we think of seeing as something that just happens to us, images are put in front of our eyes. You say maybe we control our perspective, but how do we control what we see? But if you understand that vision is already a projection, then we understand that nothing is objective, nothing is objectively observed. We are always subjectively seeing. So therefore, the beginning of Ayin Tov, of a good eye, of seeing positively, of the purification of our vision, really has to begin within ourselves. Because if we see everything from the way we are, then the way we believe ourselves to be is how we're going to see the world. So everything needs to begin with how we observe ourselves, how we think of ourselves, what we believe about ourselves. And that is the lens through which we are going to observe the universe. And therefore, the beginning of purifying our vision begins with the way we see ourselves, understanding and believing ourselves to be inherently worthy and good and kind and creations, divine creations, and a spark of the divine, and a gift from Hashem, and needed in this world, and deserving. All these things we need to believe and see in ourselves. That will shift the way we see the universe. Everything that we see from here on in will be through that lens. It will change how we see the world. Even things that we think are absolute are only how we see them. So the first step towards Ayin Tova, a good eye, is really how we see ourselves. That begins the way we observe the universe. On the reverse side of that, the flip side of Ayin Tov is an Ayin Hara, is the evil eye, is the negative eye. This week, we read the Parsha of Balak. Yes, she's keeping track. I'm very impressed. So what happens in Balak? Balak hires Bilam to be his lackey to go and curse the Jewish people. He sends him, he says, you have the power to curse. I want you to go and curse the Jewish people. And Bilam realizes something. He knows a thing or two about cursing, and he understands something about casting an evil eye on another person. And that is that you cannot cast an evil eye on someone who does not believe themselves to be able to be affected by it. When a person sees themselves with an Ayin Tov, believes themselves to be inherently worthy, if you think badly about that person, it's impenetrable. You cannot affect the person with your evil, negative thoughts or jealousy. That Ayin Hara is very much about jealousy also. It's about seeing a person and not believing that that person is worthy of the blessings that they have. It's believing that those people shouldn't have that blessing. Casting an evil eye on another person, God forbid, is saying, I don't think you should have the blessings that you have. Or thinking something negative about them, or believing that they should not be blessed. But if a person believes themselves to be inherently worthy, they cannot be affected by that. Only when a person doesn't hold themselves or believes in the evil that the person is projecting on them can that evil affect them. So what does Bilam do? He tries to curse them. He sees they're impenetrable. The Jewish people are strong. They're in a good place. They understand themselves to be worthy and above his evil eye. So he brings sin into their midst. He brings this idea of chet. He causes them to sin and weakens them, weakens their own perception of themselves. Suddenly they see themselves as fallible. They see themselves as unworthy, undeserving. Then there's an opening for the evil eye to come in. So really, this idea of the evil eye, it doesn't have power if we don't allow it the power. And so it begins with our own perception of ourselves and our Ayin Tova, which prevents evil eye from being able to affect us. What I want to talk about. Anything that we see is really a reflection of who we are. We said the Baal Shem Tov speaks about this a lot, that if we see something negative in another person, it's a sign that that exists within ourselves. And if we see something negative in the universe, it's telling us that there is something we need to work on in ourselves. If we understand that everything starts with our own perception of self, then it shifts our perspective. So what happened? The Meraglim went out to see the land, and they saw very negative, because they didn't believe themselves. They felt small. They felt in their eyes, they looked at the people of the land of Israel, of Canaan, and they said they see us as ants, because that's really how they saw themselves. That's how they perceived themselves, and that's why they were not able to enter into the land. They didn't have the power to enter into the land because they didn't believe themselves to be able to. So practically, how do we prevent ayin hara from affecting us? Because it's a real thing, and we need to be aware of this. God forbid if somebody has an evil eye or looks at us in an evil way or in a negative, disparaging way. There's a concept in halacha, in Jewish law, which is that words cancel out thoughts and actions cancel out words. So a word is always more powerful than a thought, and an action is always more powerful than the word. So if we feel somebody to be thinking negative thoughts about us, then the way to counteract that is by speaking positive affirmations, by speaking positively about ourselves, about our own quality, understanding ourselves to be worthy and speaking it. The word will cancel out the thought. And what happens if someone is, God forbid, speaking negatively about us? Let's say, for example, God forbid, someone is saying that I am a selfish person who doesn't do good for other people. How do we cancel out that evil speech from affecting us? Our actions that negate that speech cancels out those words. So by doing a selfless act, by acting in a way that shows that we are not actually what that person is saying we are, we cancel out those words. So the words we say will cancel out the negative thoughts, and the actions that we do will cancel out negative words. And by positive actions and positive speech and positive thought, we affect the universe positively. We know there's something called the observer effect, right? So look, we were talking about seeing that it's not something passive, that we're actively seeing. Light is reflected, and we are projecting outward that imagery. Even more than that, there's this concept in physics, quantum mechanics. I don't know, I'm very, very far from a physicist, so I touch on it on a very surface way. But there is something that's called the observer effect, which means that the observer actually affects that which they are observing. So and this is actually measurable in physics. They can actually measure the effect on electrons. There's like this famous study from the Weizmann Institute that they did this study with electrons, and they could see that when the electrons were being observed, they shifted. Their nature actually shifted. So when we observe something, we're actually shifting something within that which we observe. So if we observe it positively, we're shifting it for the positive. If, God forbid, we observe people, objects, the world in a negative way, we are actually bringing negative energy to that. So ayin hara and ayin tova, these are real things. They really affect the universe. They affect, and the way we perceive the world creates an aura around us, and that's the energy force that surrounds us. So the way we see ourselves in the world creates a positive or negative, God forbid, force around us. We need to be very, very, very careful with the way that we see ourselves and the way we observe the universe. And this begins with the tears of this month. How do we cry this month? What does it mean that we mourn and we cry? The word Tammuz, the name of the month Tammuz, is actually only found after the destruction of the temple. We began, and I know you have a question. I don't know if you still have a question, but because I'm recording, we'll wait till the end and then everyone will ask. unless you really don't understand it, I can pause. Until the time of the destruction, the month of Tammuz was simply known as the 4th month of the year. After the destruction, it took on the name of Tammuz. In Yecheskel, it speaks about Tammuz as being an idol. This was a pagan practice in the time after the destruction of the temple. And what was this particular idol, this pagan practice? There was this idol that was called Tammuz, and it was made of some material or substance that would melt in the heat. So they would put it out in the sun, and in the heat it would appear to be weeping. And the people would surround this idol and weep with the idol. What was this weeping that occurred in the month of Tammuz? The month of Tammuz generally is when the summer solstice occurs. This year it was I think it was June 21st, that was the summer solstice. And the summer solstice basically is the peak of summer. So after the summer solstice, the days start slowly becoming shorter and shorter. So what were they weeping for? Particularly, they said the women would weep with the idol Tammuz. You know, when spring begins and we have such high hopes, it's a time of renewal and rebirth, and there's so much possibility in the air, and we feel like we have all these expectations of what's going to happen in the spring and the summer, and love is going to come into our lives, and this is going to happen, and that's going to happen. And then suddenly, as the days would become shorter, they would realize that we're already coming towards the end, we're going down, and our hopes and dreams haven't been realized. So it was a crying of despair, it was a mourning of lost hope. And the mourning that we experience in this month is actually a tikkun for that, because we're not crying in despair. The grief of the destruction of the temple is always tempered by the knowledge that the redemption is already in process, that we are already moving towards a time of redemption. That the destruction, the pain is really a pain of longing and yearning for what was and for what will be. So we understand that we're moving towards something. So the pain is a pain of separation, of yearning, but it's not a despair. We haven't lost something forever. We're just separated from it. And that pain is a pain of wanting to be reunited, of wanting to be in that place again. So we cry, we don't cry like the idol Tammuz. There's a rectification of these tears. Our tears come from a place where we know that there's hope. We know that when our tears dry, our vision is going to be clearer, our eyes are going to be sharper and cleaned, our vision is going to be purified. We're going to see things much more clearly. We're going to see that the seeds of redemption were sown in those very moments of our grief. And that is the purification of our vision. What is this about the or? V'yar Elokim es ha'or ki tov. Hashem saw the light, and seeing is good. The light is good, seeing is good. What is positive, real positive seeing is when we can look at the world and see it for what it is, for Hashem, the goodness of Hashem's creation, when we can see the purity, the absolute oneness of creation in everything we observe. That's how we see the world in its perfect state. When we can see the world and understand each person that we see to be Hashem's creation, to be a perfect manifestation of Hashem's light, that every part of the world that we observe it to be something which stands on its own as a creation of Hashem. How do we sort of pervert that? When we see something and we desire it, and then we feel like we need to possess it. And that's the shadow side of this month, the idea of jealousy. We said you can only desire that which you see, and you can only be jealous of that which you desire. The Even Ezra asks the question, how is it that one of the commandments is that we shouldn't be jealous? How can you command a person not to be jealous? It's like, it's an emotion. It's a very deep, strong emotion. How can you tell a person not to feel an emotion? You know, don't feel this. How do I not feel that? As a matter of fact, the idea of jealousy is such a powerful emotion. The The word Tammuz relates to the words in Daniel, where we say Lemezi la'atuna, the fiery furnace. Lemezi refers to the word Tammuz. And that idea, when we say you have jealousy, you say we're burning up with jealousy, right? We don't use that for other emotions necessarily, but you say you're burning up with jealousy, even burning up with desire. These things elicit a burning sensation, something which is fiery, an emotion which overtakes you. So the Ebenezer asks, how is it possible that we say don't feel? How do you tell a person don't feel? So he gives a mashal, he gives a parable of a maid who works in the palace. There's this scullery maid. She's not even like the maid that works in the kitchen. She works in the shadow side of the palace. She's like sweeping out the chimney fireplace. She's the lowest of maids in the palace. Will this maid desire the king? She may love the king. She may see the king and think that he's wonderful. Will she be jealous of the queen, that the queen possesses the king? Will she desire the king for herself? It's not even within her mind that this would be something that she could possess. Therefore, there's no possibility for jealousy. Think about ourselves when we go, you're standing in a museum and you're looking at a beautiful painting, Matisse, Monet. You're looking at a painting and you're overwhelmed by the beauty of it. Do you get jealous that the museum owns this and not you? Because you don't really feel like you're going to shell out the $500 million to buy it. It's not even within your reach. Let's say even more than that. If I'm out in nature and observing the mountains, do I desire to possess those mountains? Do I need to have it? Am I jealous for the land that has those mountains? Or can I just see those mountains for the beauty of creation and for Hashem's perfection in the universe that exists and just appreciate it for what it is? That's the answer to how I love this. My sister used to always take her kids she lives in the city, and she always, I thought this was the funniest thing, she'd take her kids to FAO Schwartz, and she always told them that it's a toy museum. So it used to be like a real great afternoon with her kids. She would take them to the toy museum and they would look at the toys. And it was amazing. They never asked to buy anything because it was a museum. So there wasn't even the possibility that they would own those toys. And suddenly, when there was that removal of the possibility, there was no desire, there was no jealousy or need to own it or possess it. It was a museum. It was for observing. It was for appreciating the beauty of all those toys. So when we can see the world like that, when we can look at an object and a person and appreciate the inherent beauty of that person or that object as a creation of Hashem without the need to possess it, without the desire to own it, we then purify our vision. We see things stripped of the narrative, stripped of our own emotional attachment. We see things as they are, and that is V'yar Elokim es ha'or ki tov. It's purity of creation, seeing things as they exist. So that's what we're working towards in this month, is really clarifying our vision, being able to see things for what they are, and hopefully what they are is how we are, which is good and pure and worthy and deserving, and that's how we observe the universe. We're told, ayin ba'ayin, b'shuv Hashem l'tzion, that when we finally experience the final redemption, we will be able to see eye to eye with Hashem. We will be in a relationship where we see each other. We're told in Gemara Chagiga that when we went up to the Beis HaMikdash, we went to see Hashem and to be seen by Hashem. And really this is the purity of vision, when you can see another for who they really are, and you can see the goodness in another, and you can be seen fully. When we can feel ourselves to see Hashem in this world and be seen fully by Hashem. And that is the purification of our sight, of our vision. And then the water of this month is a water of pure desire for a oneness with Hashem, desire to be reunified and redeemed and in a place of wholeness. And God willing, we will experience that very quickly in our days. And this month should be transformed. We're told that the 17th day of Tammuz, which is one of the saddest days in the Jewish calendar, is going to be completely transformed into the day of ultimate celebration and rejoicing. And so I want to bless us all that we should experience that very, very quickly. B'mehera v'yameinu mamish, today in our days. Amen. And now if anybody has any questions, now's the time. Let me just stop. Oh.